Coach Joe Drake here, AKA the PT professor with the Axiom Fitness Academy, and I got my girl Killa Cole here to model for us. We're gonna go through and break down everything that you need to know with the overhead squat, what to look for, how to do it. Let's jump in. First things first, when it comes to the overhead squat, I wanna make sure you guys have a sense of not only what you need to know to pass the exam, like lovely Cole, who was once upon a time an Axiom Fitness Academy graduate, and now she's out there. She's a YouTube star, actually. You can find her. Search Killa Cole Intensity X3 for some badass kickboxing. But not only to pass the NASM exam, but just in general to know how do I utilize this when I'm actually working with clients and what's the real purpose of it. So as we start out, what I'm gonna have Cole do, I'm just gonna have her and I'm gonna explain it as you would if you had a client coming into the gym as well, because we wanna give some detail, but not too much initially. And then we're gonna talk about, just from the big picture perspective, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we looking for? So first off, Cole, thanks for being here. Second off, if you wouldn't mind, just face our audience at home for us. And all I want you to do is just get into what would be like a comfortable squat stance for you, about hip width. I do want you to try to keep your toes as forward as possible. And then I just want you to keep those arms nice and straight, bring them all the way up overhead. And then take your time, nice and slow, just drop down into as deep of a comfortable squat as you can. And Cole's just gonna keep going as we walk through this. But in general, what we're looking for here when we do the overhead squat is we wanna see the big picture. All right, the rest of this video, we are gonna break down the specifics that you need to know, not only for the NASM exam, but also to identify the overactive and underactive muscles and maybe some corrective exercise approaches, but we don't wanna miss the big picture. Very few people, right, and as we look at it, Cole, and we'll break it down, she's got a pretty good looking overhead squat. And Cole, if you don't mind, turn this way. She's got a pretty good looking overhead squat, but our main objectives and priorities are, we wanna identify just overall how does this person move, right? Without us even breaking into the checkpoints yet, what's your initial reaction? And you guys are probably at home like, oh, it looks pretty good. It is pretty good. But we want to understand what exercises should they not be doing, and then what exercises are going to help them train with the most intensity. And you can stop right there. Because it's going to be very easy for us to try to nitpick and break down. And there may be some clients that are coming in for those reasons, but we got to keep in mind as personal trainers, we're not physical therapists. We're not here just to fix everyone. We do want to help people move better though, and we want to find the exercises they can move with so they can train with intensity and change their body. All right, so I wanted to make sure you guys had a bigger picture perspective of what's going on. See the big picture first, because very rarely are you going to have someone come in with as beautiful of an overhead squat, although I'm not surprised. Like I said, she's an Axiom grad, as Cole. All right, but we are going to break in the next couple of sections. We'll take a look at the anterior and the lateral views, but your main checkpoints, just like when we're doing a static postural assessment, it's going to be the foot and the ankle. We're going to take a look at what's going on at the knee. We'll also identify here what's happening at the LPHC and the pelvis. Then we're going to take a look at the torso and the shoulders from those different angles. When we kick off our overhead squat as an assessment, first thing we want to do is we want to get an anterior view, right? Looking from the front side. And just from a higher level perspective, just a few things that we're going to see, and you guys can compare this stuff, even as you're watching the video, to your overhead squat solutions table if you are studying for the NASM exam. And those few checkpoints, really all we're going to look at from the front is going to be the foot and the ankle and the knee. Now, obviously, we still see a big picture perspective, and there may be some asymmetries that stick out, but when it comes to understanding the checkpoints that you're looking for, our primary focus is going to be the foot and the ankle and the knee. Now, before she drops down into her overhead squat, this is going to be a big area of focus, and we start our assessments from the ground up because it gives us a lot of information about the kinetic chain, right? Again, if you guys are studying, that's probably a familiar term for you. If you're just watching this for your own well-being, what it means is that all forces transfer up through the ground. So if we know anything that might be moving abnormally or in a different position down here, it has the ability to impact further up. That's why it's such an important area. And you guys can also see that Cole, and she's going to go through a couple reps here for me, she's doing this assessment barefoot. All right. Now, again, you may find yourself in some scenarios, either the environment or the client, where you're not doing it barefoot. It's okay. You can still get a lot of good information. But in a perfect world, we want to do it with bare feet. And that's because those shoes, like the shoes I'm wearing, oftentimes they give us stability and they can hide things. All right. So what we're looking here for at the feet, first off, if we start forward, our first checkpoint is going to be, do those toes turn out? And you can come back up to the top and rest there. So we're looking for that alignment. And the reason that, although most people, myself included, very few people are going to squat comfortably with weight with toes forward. It gives us information about what's going on at the ankle, and more specifically, ankle range of motion with our soleus and our gastroc, those primary calf muscles. All right, so again, that's problem solving. We're gonna start with those feet forward and we're looking. And Cole's gonna demonstrate what we maybe don't wanna see, right? Or really just what might be a red flag to us, something we're gonna note down. And as she goes down into that overhead squat, she's just gonna turn those toes out, all right? So I want you guys to pay attention as she drops down. Those toes turn out a little bit further and just hold that position for a second, all right? Now some people, this may be a coachable thing, right? So Cole, I want you to come back up to the top. I want you to try to do your best to keep those toes forward. Don't let those toes move. And sit back down again. And good. So one thing to keep in mind from that big picture perspective with the assessment is they just might not have squatted before. So this is a really great opportunity, you can rest those shoulders, to actually coach a little bit. And again, without making it a side video, if you are doing this for the first time, maybe you're meeting with someone for the first time, you want to give them the opportunity to coach, because otherwise the assessment might not be giving you accurate information. It is going to be great to see how people move, but sometimes if I can fix it with just one verbal cue, I'm not going to necessarily call that, let's say, a movement issue or an abnormality, an overactive, underactive. It just might mean that they're not used to doing these exercises, right? So don't be afraid to coach and problem solve. But what that means is if we have someone who turned those feet out, let's say they can't keep their toes in, no way, right? She squats down and those toes turn out. That takes us to our overactive and our underactive muscles. And Cole's gonna turn around just for a second actually, so we can kind of take a look. Now she's got a pretty good amount of what we call ankle dorsiflexion. So give me a couple more reps here. As she squats down, you see that knee actually translates forward. A lot of people are worried about the knees moving forward, but for most people, we want it to be able to travel over the top of those toes. And that's the only way she's gonna drop down in good depth. So for a lot of people, when we turn those toes out, our potential, or probably our most likely overactive area, and you can go ahead and relax back up at the top, stand right there. Most potential overactive area, calves, right? Simply calves, and we'll say gastroc and soleus, both of those two primary calf muscles. And what turning the toe out does, if we turn the toe out, it just makes us, as we squat, you don't have to dorsiflex as much. So it's our body's natural way of saying like, well, let me find a way to get down here. So that's the easiest thing to keep in mind. Most likely is going to be gastroc and soleus. You'll find on your overhead squat solutions table and inside the materials for NASM, the hamstrings also are a potential overactive muscle. I do find that sometimes inside of becoming a personal trainer or at this level of information, it's hard for us to really identify that. A lot of people have issues starting and stemming from here, but it might be a reason further down the line after the overhead squat, maybe we try some other assessments and we get a sense of maybe those hamstrings are tight. But either way, those are your three primary potential overactive muscles. And then underactive, if Cole can face back towards the camera for me, really, we want to think in opposition. When it comes to overactive and underactive with the overhead squat, if we have overactivity in the gastroc and soleus, right, they may be, you can consider it tight or there's too much signal being sent there and that's limiting her ability to dorsiflex at the ankle. Well, then the underactivity is usually going to be those antagonistic muscles on the opposite side. And in this case, we're going to talk anterior tibialis and also the posterior tibialis, right? And feel free to look those muscles up outside of this video to get a better visual. But these muscles, as Cole squats down into her overhead squat, not only do our calves limit us, but these muscles actually help to pull us there. So if you'll drop down, that anterior tibialis, if we have the right amount of activity, it also helps to pull us there and create that balance between this mobility and strength and stability inside of that ankle complex. Reminder for you, if and when you're starting to do this with clients, easiest thing really is use the chart, use the check marks that NASM gives you, because it's really hard to dissect everything in the moment. Years and years and time and experience, it's going to give you that information, but feel free just to take note. And it's going to be something you explore a little bit further with other movements as you take them through initial sessions, right? So it's all information. It doesn't mean, holy cow, she's broken, we can't squat. All right? And again, as we look at Cole doing it, she actually has pretty good ankle range of motion. And I'm going to give you one really quick hack to be able to know, is it the ankles that are causing this issue with the toes turning out, or is it something else? If they can't keep their toes in that forward direction with the overhead squat, can they do it with a little bit of an elevated heel lift, right? Taking away the dorsiflexion out of the equation, are they able to keep their toes forward? So all I would do is I would just place something that slightly elevates Cole's heels behind her, and then ask her to go through it and do it again. drop down. Again, hers looked pretty good before, but if all of, yeah, and she's like, well, that feels good. Yeah, for a lot of people, this allows you to drop into more depth, and we'll look at that later in the assessment, but that would tell me right away, okay, cool, this is probably the ankles. And inside of this video, we're not gonna solve all the problems. I just wanna give you guys an idea of what to look for and the potential overactive and underactive muscles, and you guys can refer to some of our other videos for problem solving these scenarios as far as what exercises to do to activate those underactive muscles, as well as some moves to perform for the overactive ones as well. So now that we've covered what to look for at the foot and the ankle, right, and there's a lot, we could spend even more time talking about the foot stability, and although it's not on the NASM chart as far as the overhead squat solutions table, it's very much related to our foot position, is also just seeing what happens with the arch. And that's gonna relate to our second checkpoint, which is looking at the knees. Okay, so we look, where does the toe track, where do the feet track? And then up from there, we're gonna see what happens with those knees. Are they gonna track in the overhead squat right over the top of the feet, or do we have some sort of lateral movement, which we'll call knee valgus? So Cole's gonna perform just a couple for us up top, and she's gonna show us what that knee valgus looks like. So as she drops down into the squat, you can see it's almost uncomfortable to watch, right? The knees caving in, and she's doing a great job of demonstrating it. But it's not uncommon, and this may even be extreme, but even when someone drops down, maybe you'll see just one knee come in a little bit as they come into that overhead squat. This would be a good example of the knee valgus that we're looking for. In a perfect world, without the overactive and underactive issues a lot of people are dealing with, we want those knees to relatively track right over the top of like your first and second toe, and any deviations of that we're gonna look for. Now again, we're gonna go back to our coaching here. So if I were to coach Cole and say, okay, Cole, as you drop down, I want you now, just try to push your knees out a little bit as you drop down into that squat. And once again, if she can fix it, it just might be a motor learning thing. She just might not be there yet and with the right coaching, all right? Because that, with the conscious effort, some people it's even like, hey, if you push out against and they push, can they track down in that position? Might mean, hey, they're not broken, but it's just gonna be something we work on as we coach them into the squat position. Now looking overactive and underactive muscles. So Cole, give us just 1 or 2 more reps here. In that overhead squat, I want you guys to think, because all this is just problem solving. If we look at the body, what might be overactive or tight, pulling us into a certain position, and what might be underactive that's not firing enough to keep us in the optimal alignment. As we look at it, what could be pulling the knee inward are 2 likely or potential overactive muscles. TFL, which actually can be a tricky one, because as you look at your anatomical charts, it doesn't make as much sense. Your tensor fasciae latae, it's kind of a weird one to say, but your TFL, which actually creates part of your IT band, sits out here on the side of the hip, and it kind of comes in at an angle. Now, if we have overactivity there, again, that's very much related to TFL, quad tightness, but it has the ability to create some instability there, right, where the knee might be pulled in. The one that's probably gonna make more sense for you is gonna be the adductors, because if the knee is caving in, the question's like, well, what could be pulling it in, especially if it's overactivity, and we can just think, all right, well, what muscles sit on the inside, the medial portion of the thigh, and those are gonna be your adductors, your adductor complex, a very common area for people to have some tightness and restriction, because again, how many people are walking around all day stretching out their inner thighs? Not many. You're probably like, I've never seen anyone do that on video before, but here we are. All right, so inner thighs, that can be one. So that may be your 2 likely overactive muscles. And then if we think about it again, it's just antagonistic, opposite muscle groups. So especially with the adductors, if we think overactivity here, let's just go to the opposite side of the leg, right? Most likely potential underactive muscles are gonna be glute medius, which actually sits on the outside of the pelvis and the hip, and then our glute max, right? Our nice big juicy butt cheek. Either one of those, because those muscles, they not only help to extend the hip, but they're also external rotators, and they're involved in that abduction. So as we drop down, Cole's gonna give us 1 good squat again as the knees kind of come out right over the top of the toes. Those muscles, if they're firing, they help to stabilize the hip and the knee tracks in the right position. You can come right back up, and if those adductors are overactive, they have the potential to pull those things in. So those are your primary checkpoints on the front side. We talked a little bit about the foot and the ankle, what to look for, what might be happening and why, and then also tracking of the knee and understanding this synergy and relationship between adductors and our abductors of the hip. So we covered all the major things that you're gonna look for from that anterior side, look at the foot of the ankle and then at the knee, and then we're gonna move to a lateral view. And it makes a lot of sense, just like when we're coaching clients in real life, in the gym, we wanna get different angles and perspectives because each of those is gonna give us different information about the body. And the lateral view may be one of the most beneficial. There's a lot of things going on here in this kinetic chain as we go into a squat. A lot of things have to be working right for it to look as good as Cole's do, and we're gonna break each of these down. Just from our bigger picture, 30,000 foot view perspective, the areas that we're really gonna pay attention to, first, it's gonna be the LPHC, so what's going on at the hips and the low back, and then we're gonna move into our torso and our shoulder, and we'll break down again each of the underactive potential and overactive areas. So that first one, so I want you guys just to see before I even break everything down, Cole's gonna go through just a couple of reps for me from this position. So again, we want to look from a global perspective. In my mind as a coach, are there exercises that I'm going to be limited, things she may or may not be able to do, or relative to her goals or previous injuries, does anything stand out to me? Good. We're going to drop down and hold this next one, so come back up and then drop right back down. And so from a big picture perspective, in a perfect world, we're looking for two somewhat parallel lines from her arms and torso and her shins. And although, again, if we get nitpicky and you guys pause the video, there's a slight discrepancy, all right? It's way better than most, and it's pretty good. We're looking for big exaggerations of either of those, so pop up to the top. So that may not be on your solutions table, but that is one thing we're looking for. Are there somewhat parallel lines? That's gonna tell us that our torso angle is pretty similar to our shin angle, right? And if someone has the ankle range of motion issues we looked at earlier, you'll see all that show up here. But first thing first, we're talking just LPHC, this lumbo-pelvic hip complex. So many muscles attaching to the anterior, so many to the back. And this is a great place for us to start problem solving these muscle synergies and force couples, really just the fact that all these muscles work together. And if we see any abnormal movement, and the most common thing we might see is we see some arching of that low back. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons it might happen. So Cole's gonna go down. It might even be tough for her to do it, but she's gonna try to arch her low back as she goes into the overhead squat. Yeah, there we go. And nice control right back up one more time. And you guys can see again, kind of an excessive curvature, not uncommon, even probably more common in women, and you can relax down just based upon pelvis and hip build. So again, let's just think, what could be pulling us into that position? And I say pulling because that's gonna be the easiest way for us to think about the overactive muscles, muscles that might have too much activity pulling our body down. So if we think about the pelvis, this bucket of water, the muscles that could be pulling us downward, well, two that pop up to us right away could be our hip flexor complex, right? Hip flexor, psoas, iliopsoas, and our quadriceps that could be overactive and pulling us down into that position, right? So that is one potential area. The other part of that too could also be our erector spinae, right? Because our erector spinae low back muscles, boom, they also have the ability to pull up on that pelvis. So those are two potential overactive areas that we could have too much activity that are pulling us into this other kind of anterior pelvic tilt position. And then if we look at it on the opposite side, well, what muscles have the ability to pull us the opposite way? These would be our underactive muscles if we're seeing that. And this, I find personally, might be the most common reason that this happens. Obviously, we do have a lot of people who may have some overactive hip flexors, but a lot of it is learning to activate and engage the core during a squat. And it doesn't mean we have to like tuck underneath like a dog, right? Dog going to the bathroom, but we want to control that. So some of it could be our actual abdominal complex, our rectus abdominis specifically, activation here that helps to keep that pelvis in a good position. And then again, if we're thinking opposites for our overactive, it's also opposites for our underactive. Also the glutes and the hamstrings have the ability to pull down on the pelvis. So this combination. So once again, there's problem solving to be done beyond the overhead squat. And as we talk through some other videos, you'll see some good examples. My easy one here and having someone perform and see is if we throw something in their hands in front, which fires up more core activation, does it change that pelvic tilt? All right, so those are your overactive, underactive things to look for in regards to that. Now the next thing here that we look for is gonna be the angle of our torso. We talked a little bit about low back movement. And then from there, maybe we don't have low back movement, but let's say as Cole goes down into the overhead squat and her torso, she's gonna kind of bow forward, all right? So our next checkpoint is looking at what happens. Do we have an excessive forward lean? And this is where those torso and our shin angles come into play. Now we can see, right, shin angles here, torso angles way here. That's a big discrepancy that would say, okay, there's something going on that's forcing her to bow forward in a very big way as we go into that overhead squat. And you can stand back up to the top. And if we go back to stuff we talked about with the foot and the ankle, probably one of the most common ones that I find for a lot of people, although there are some things here we'll talk about, potential overactivity going right back to the ankles again. Because, and I'll come around to this side, oftentimes our body's great at finding a way to get down, but she might be avoiding this ankle range of motion. And so in order to get down, she just says, okay, let me just keep bowing forward until I get there. And especially for a lot of people who aren't used to being barefoot, Cole's pretty regularly barefoot, as you guys will see her on YouTube and her kickboxing videos. You know, they don't have that heel lift, and so the ankle range of motion becomes an issue. So that's potential. Again, going back to the overactive areas of the body, potentially going to be gastroc and soleus. Now, if it's not that, let's think again back to what could be pulling me forward, what might not be holding me up. The other potential overactive area here is as she sits back into her squat, no doubt the femurs are pushing back, and if she's got any tightness or overactivity in the abdominal complex, right, abdominal complex and or hip flexors again, then that has a potential also to pull her forward. So that may be an area of overactivity. And if we go back to our easy problem solving, if one side is overactive, most times underactivity on the opposite side. So potential for underactivity in the erector spinae, glutes and hamstrings, anything that would actually keep her body and her torso upright. One more thing in regards to the pelvis itself when it comes to that excessive curvature of the spine, potentially that anterior pelvic tilt, it could also be our lats. So as Cole goes down into this overhead squat, she's gonna arch that low back. We talked about the force couples here at the pelvis, and often forgotten one is actually the role that the lats play, and she's going to be super strong and hold this next one for us, right? Let's see how strong she is the lats, right? We have attachment here in the lumbar spine, this thoracolumbar fascia, and it comes up throughout the arms. So she's maintaining a good position here, but it can pull either way. So someone might have good shoulder position, but it could also be where the lats actually come from and originate here down in that thoracolumbar fascia that's pulling on the pelvis and creating that anterior pelvic tilt. Great job, you can pop back up for me. So I wanted to make sure we covered that because that's another common one. And that's actually going to relate to our last thing that we'll look at from the side. And our last piece of the puzzle, one of the reasons that the overhead squat is so beneficial because it gives us this full body perspective is what's going on with the arms and the shoulder. Okay, so Cole's been doing a great job. Really in an ideal overhead squat, we're looking for that shoulder to remain in a pretty, ideal, similar line to our torso. And she's been doing that throughout. But she's gonna go ahead and show you guys the arms falling forward a little bit in the overhead squat position. So she maintains good position everywhere else. And you can see torso angles here, arms start to fall forward here, and she's gonna go through a couple more for us. And this ties right back into what I was talking about with the pelvis, which is the fact that if we do have overactivity in the lats, not an uncommon thing, especially whether there's someone who's been building a lot of muscle and working out and creating tension, or a lot of people just don't have great overhead mobility. And those lats, she may maintain good position here, and they end up pulling the shoulders down and forward. Good, you can go ahead and stand back up. So that's one of our potential overactive areas, but that's just the posterior side. If we think about it, it's really just problem solving what could be limiting our overhead position, or what has the ability to pull our arm back down. Our lats are one of those. We also have our teres minor, which acts kind of like as our little lat, smaller muscle here in the back, involved in the same motions. And then also on the front side, we have our pec major and our pec minor. Those also come in. If we look at the lats themselves, the lats come up, they attach to the medial border of our humerus, the inside of the arm. Well, the pecs also come in and attach this direction as well. So as the arm goes up overhead, the lats and the pecs, they all get stretched. So if we have any restriction in any of those muscle groups, it could be limiting us from getting there. And then I'm gonna turn Cole back around just so we see as well. And if we look at from the opposite side, all right, what might not be strong enough in being able to hold our arms up overhead? Well, just in general, you can look at the muscles that are in the overhead squat solutions table. We've got our mid traps, our lower traps, our rhomboids. You can almost just consider this mid back area, right? Even our rear delts, anything that's gonna be active in holding those arms up in position. So overactivity with the arms falling forward, lats and pecs are our highest potential, and then underactivity are gonna be some of these mid back muscles. So Cole has done a killer job of showing us all different angles and views that we want to be looking at for the overhead squat. And I just want to bring everything back together here and remind you guys that we're not trying to pick people apart. Everyone's going to walk in with injuries and issues, but your ability to see these things, pick up on those small pieces, it's going to give you great things to go with when it comes to your training and programming, not only working with and around injuries, but also helping to select the right exercises for each client. We know everyone needs to do some sort of squat, but maybe I need to be doing back squatting, maybe Cole needs to be doing front squatting, and our movement assessment gives us that type of information. Now beyond this, we went through everything to look for from the anterior view, from the lateral view. I personally, even though it's not inside of the NASM material, I like to see a posterior view as well, which is looking from the back side. And the only reason for that is oftentimes small things like hip shifts and asymmetries, you just get a better view of from the back. So it may not be in your checkmark list, but I would take someone through the posterior view as well, and it just might give you some information. Maybe they're shifting away from an old injury, or honestly, our hips are just built different. And that's gonna give you some good info about maybe some things you might not have seen from the anterior or that lateral view. But easiest way to start this, get practice, go through. If you want to do it on yourself, video it, break it down from these different angles, and look for those primary checkpoints. They'll be the same with most of our assessments from standing. We're looking at the feet, we're looking at the knees, pelvis and hips, torso, and the shoulder, and that's going to give you a lot of info. And from there, this is where the real work comes in, which is figuring out with our overactive and underactive, what do I do about it? Well, the overactive muscles, those just might be areas of focus for your mobility and your flexibility work. And the underactive areas, those are gonna be the areas that we wanna make sure we're prioritizing activation, getting those muscles firing more in our warm-ups and also in our workouts with clients. So either way, I hope this was helpful for you guys in trying to understand the overhead squat. You guys can see the link in the video if you guys are watching this on YouTube to additional videos that give you some more scenarios and also give you some great exercises and approaches to taking this information and moving forward and doing something with it. All right, either way, best of luck in the fitness industry. If you're taking your NASM exam sometime in the future, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Coach Joe Drake, PT Professor, Axiom Fitness Academy. We'll see you soon.